Today, we are stepping into the realm of one of the most commanding figures in tarot, the Emperor. This is a card that often evokes strong reactions. Some people immediately connect with its themes of leadership, confidence, and stability, while others feel resistance towards its associations with authority, rules, and control. Yet, whether we embrace it or challenge it, the Emperor represents an energy that all of us encounter over the course of our lifetimes. It is the force that creates order from chaos and transforms ideas into structures. It is a card that asks us to take responsibility for the world that we are building around us. Today, on Third Eye View, we are diving into the rich evolution of this card, the archetypes associated with it, and all of the pop culture goodness connected to the Emperor, right after this. So when we first look at the Emperor card, we are presented with a striking image. The ruler sits upon a massive stone throne, and it is often adorned with ram heads. Now, rams are an astrological association here, connected to Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac, and Aries is ruled by Mars, the divine masculine of the zodiac, and the planet of action, courage, ambition, and leadership. Behind the Emperor, we see steep mountains. It's very rugged and barren in contrast to the Emperor's counterpart, the Empress, which we talked about last week. These mountains remind us that achievement requires endurance. It requires discipline. And we have to be willing to face the hard times, to rise to the top of the peak and face the valleys that will come in between. The Emperor is not sitting in a garden of ease and comfort. He sits in a landscape that is shaped by effort and perseverance. These rocks in the background in the conventional tarot look a lot like the Grand Canyon. It takes years for them to erode to the point where we understand and know them as they are. So this is about the precision, the time that it takes to keep chipping away at something so it forms the shape that we understand it as today. That discrepancy between the very lush, nature-filled garden of the Empress and this sort of barren, desolate, very jagged landscape that is the Emperor is the discrepancy between the matriarchy and the patriarchy. Another fascinating detail is the armor that is visible through his royal robes. So you can see he's wearing this red garb up top, and yet you can see that underneath his robes there is chainmail, gauntlets, all sorts of stuff that alludes to armor. Even though he is seated and appears to be in a secure position, he remains prepared. The armor suggests that leadership comes with responsibility and that maintaining order requires vigilance. This is also directly connected to Aries and Mars, which both rule over that warrior spirit. On one hand, he commonly holds some sort of scepter. This symbolizes his authority and his power to govern. In the other hand, he usually holds some sort of orb or something mystical that represents mastery of the physical world in some capacity. Every element of this card reinforces the same message, which is that this is the archetype of structure, discipline, and the ability to create lasting foundations. At its heart, the Emperor asks us to consider how we relate to power. Of course, this can be our own relationship to our inner power, something that is true to the journey of the Fool. By the time the Fool gets to the Emperor, this is where they are developing their inner fortitude. However, it can also be how we relate to the external power sources that are around us, whether that is our government, authority figures, the patriarchy, capitalism, big business, whatever you want to call it, those larger systematic structures that govern our reality and our society. That is also sources of power and how we as people relate to those sources of power. In tarot readings, this card often appears when we are being called to step into a greater sense of responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Hey, we're jumping ahead to the pop culture of it all. If you know that quote, you know. It may signal that you need clearer plans or a more disciplined approach to your goals. Sometimes we can be inspired by dreams and possibilities, which we see a lot more in those feminine archetypal cards, like the High Priestess or like the Empress. But without structure to those dreams, they just remain ideas that are floating in the imagination or in the collective consciousness. And so the Emperor is here to help ground those feminine wiles, those feminine intuitive hits, those feminine creative endeavors, and give it the structure and the space that it needs to come to fruition. The Emperor teaches us that every vision requires a blueprint. Every single goal requires a plan, and every aspiration requires consistent, diligent action if we want to see movement, if we want to move the needle. In our everyday life, we can experience the Emperor energy far more often than we may even realize. It appears a lot of the times when we create a budget, for example, or when we commit to a new routine. The energy of the Emperor emerges when we establish healthy boundaries in our relationships or when we take on leadership responsibilities at work. We may encounter the Emperor energy when we are building out habits and systems and routines that support our well-being, whether that is a running schedule, a meditation tracker, or just scheduling time in your calendar for creative work. That creative time is the more feminine Empress energy, but the fact that we're blocking our calendar out so that we can commit to that is the masculine Emperor energy. The Emperor is present whenever we choose long-term stability over our short-term gratification. He is the voice that reminds us that success is not built through occasional bursts of effort, but through consistency and our diligence and commitment over a period of time. And yet, the Emperor is not simply about rules and discipline. Like every other tarot archetype, he contains both a light and a shadow side. The healthy Emperor has the heart on his shoulder that we see in the card, and it creates a structure that allows for growth, both for him and for the people around him that he's supporting. He protects, he guides, and he is able to provide stability. His authority is rooted in his wisdom and his ability to take responsibility for his actions. The shadow side of the Emperor, however, becomes very rigid, controlling, dominating, and even authoritative. The shadow side of this archetype often confuses leadership with compliancy or domination. It's an energy that mistakes control for security. The duality of this card is one reason why the card remains so relevant, especially today, because it is directly correlated to the structure of the patriarchy that we are currently living in. A system that benefits nobody, whether that is men or women. If you want more on that, I have a whole feminist podcast that we could talk about. This card also comes in to challenge us and our own relationship with our inner authority. Are we creating healthy structures that actually support our lives, or are we becoming trapped by rules that no longer serve us? Are we leading ourselves wisely with our internal knowledge, or are we just attempting to control every outcome because we fear the uncertainty of what may be if we surrender a little bit? To better understand the Emperor, it helps to explore the archetype that stands behind him, which is the Patriarch. In modern conversations, the word patriarch often carries some sort of social or political associations, but in archetypal psychology, it refers to something much older and much more universal. The patriarch as an archetype is the symbol and the principle of order in and of itself. He is the guardian of traditions, the keeper of boundaries, the provider of protection, and the figure in tarot and in psychology that is responsible for maintaining stability within a community. This archetype has appeared throughout human history. It has appeared in kings, in tribal leaders, in judges, in elders, and most importantly, perhaps nearest and dearest to our hearts, in father figures, when those father figures are healthy, stable men. At its very best, the patriarch is here to create safety. At its very worst, it becomes oppressive and resistant to change. The roots of this archetype stretch back thousands of years into mythology and religion, like many of our cards do. Many ancient cultures featured very powerful sky father deities who governed the cosmic order. So, for example, in Greek mythology, this would be Zeus. In Norse mythology, it would be Odin. In Roman mythology, it would be Jupiter. These gods represented humanity's attempt to understand the forces that maintain structure in both society and the universe at large. But oftentimes, divine rulers would influence cultural ideas about kingship or governance or leadership in some capacity by tying them to religion. And that's how we've ended up with these patriarchal structures that we have today, where they feel more oppressive because they are not necessarily about creating safety, but about using a platform of piety in order to gain control. In the earliest decks of tarot, the emperor represented earthly authority and political power. He was a reflection of the hierarchical world in which these cards were created, a world organized around monarchs, nobles, and institutions. As tarot then evolved into a system of spiritual philosophy and symbolism, the meaning of the card then sort of took a breath and expanded. The emperor then became much more than just a ruler. He became the representation of an inner psychological force. Rather than pointing solely to an external authority figure, this card began to symbolize our own capacity for leadership and for self-governance. So when it comes to pop culture figures, there are many like the Empress. There are so many facets and multitudes to this card, but I'm going to give you a few of my favorite examples. Mufasa from The Lion King. Mufasa embodies that strength, the responsibility, and the wise leadership. He creates safety for his pride. He takes his knowledge and he is attempting consistently to pass it down to his son. He rules with grace and without fear. He's beloved. He protects the kingdom while teaching the next generation how to lead with integrity. And in contrast, we see the shadow side of the emperor in a character like Scar, who wants to create a hierarchical society, a patriarchy in which his rule, the king of the pride, has final say, and therefore it's an oppressive society where everyone's starving. You also have on that dark side, literally in the dark side, Darth Vader, whose desire for control ultimately leads to oppression and destruction. And that's where we tend to find like the balance between these two archetypes. We have figures in pop culture whose leadership style is rooted in service. And then we have another part of the archetype where that figure is rooted in fear. Other modern examples, King T'Challa from Black Panther, who balances tradition with innovation and understands that true authority requires accountability. We also, on that shadow side, to like bring it into something that has a little bit more of realism in it, I would say Don Draper is an example of the shadow side of this archetype. Somebody who is obsessed with work, obsessed with getting ahead, obsessed with being the best at the expense of being a good father, good boss, good mentor. He's a complicated character. He's not as archetypal maybe as some of the other characters that we look at, but he still possesses a lot of that like absent at home, not really providing a lot of safety, maybe providing a lot of financial security, but not necessarily making his kids, right, feel any safer. Walter White would be another really good example. Like, in fact, creating instability and a lack of safety. Like, the deeper that Walter White gets into meth making and meth dealing is like putting his family at risk. There's sort of another part of this archetype, which is like fathers so hard that they're almost like helicopter parenting and therefore causes a lot of harm or causes fosters oppressiveness in their home, even though it is coming from a loving place. So for example, Marlin from Finding Nemo loves Nemo so much, wants nothing but to protect him, and ultimately is trying too hard to protect and therefore causes his biggest fear, which is for his son to act out. And they go on this grand adventure where he doesn't know if he's ever going to see his son again. Similar would be Joel Miller from The Last of Us. Somebody who wants to protect this person they love at all costs, and yet because of that creates an oppressive relationship. in which Ellie's autonomy is completely overridden and her desires are completely overridden in the name of protecting her. So those are just a few examples that we can look at when we are looking at an energy like this. Before we close out on today's episode, I'd like to offer a practice for you for connecting with the Emperor energy. Find a quiet place where you can sit comfortably and reflect, and ask yourself a single question, which is, where in my life do I need more structure? Once an answer comes to mind, write down 3 practical actions that would create greater stability in that area. And then keep those actions simple and achievable. Then over the next week, commit to completing them. This is the essence of the Emperor at work. It is not grand declarations of dramatic transformations, but this steady, consistent action towards getting to our goals. The Emperor teaches us that every great kingdom is built literally one stone at a time. Rome was not built in a day. Closing up on the Emperor, I will be back next Wednesday talking about the Hierophant. And until then, have a lovely week. Go put some boundaries up in place.